Hi, Tamara Stanley here. This presentation is about servant leadership as modeled by Christ and its implementation in my current context, which is Logos International School in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. So we will just go through the 10 characteristics of servant leadership and talk about how those things might be going well at my school and things that could be worked on. And we will do that all from the lens of how Christ modeled it for our example. So first of all, what I would refer to as the big picture, 3 specific of the 10 characteristics: conceptualization, persuasion, which may also be called gentle persuasion, and stewardship. So first of all, conceptualization is basically having an idea of the big picture. So not being stuck in the day-to-day activities or tasks, but looking at a big picture. And we know that Jesus did that throughout his life. In Luke 2:49, as a young teenager, 12 years old, he said, "Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" When his family had been looking for him and they weren't sure where he was. And then in John 6:38, he says, "For I have come down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me." His focus was always on accomplishing whatever God had set him before, and his overall purpose of coming to be the sacrifice and also reuniting the people with God. In Matthew 23:11, he says, "The greatest among you shall be your servant." And in Luke 9:48, he says, "For he who is least among you all is the one who is great." So this is the idea of stewardship, serving others first. This is what Jesus was all about. And for persuasion, I don't have a specific scripture reference, but we know that Jesus taught in parables, and through teaching, he brought people along without forcing them or giving directives. That's the idea of persuasion. And so we have a specific quote on the next slide. "The understanding of stewardship disarms the will to misappropriate power, because stewardship reminds leaders that we are here to serve others instead of seizing power to pursue our own benefits." So this is the main idea of stewardship, and also ties closely with persuasion. We do not need to seek our own benefits. We need to seek the will, the greater picture, serving the people. And we don't need to enforce power on the people, because we want to persuade them and just bring them along and create a big picture and an idea that they want to come along with. And this quote is from Song. You will see in the reference slide at the end the full details of the article. In that article, Song specifically says that leaders surrender their positional authority and seek to persuade people by role modeling and gentle, non-judgmental argument. And so that is one way that we can seek to bring people along with us. The next category is people first. I would say that listening and empathy are something that we do. Perhaps our response is not always strong. Christ modeled for us having empathy. Matthew 9:36, he says, "Like sheep without a shepherd." And what we are being told is Matthew is commenting that Jesus saw the crowds, and even though he had other things to do or he was going away to be on his own, he had compassion for the people because they were like sheep without a shepherd. In Luke 7:11 through 16, this is referencing when they were moving through from one community to another. They came upon a funeral procession, and a woman's son had died, and Jesus saw her, and he had compassion on her and actually stopped the procession and raised the child or the man from the dead. And John 11:35 is one of the most famous Bible verses because it's the shortest verse. Jesus wept. But remembering the story, we know that Jesus already knew that Lazarus had been sick and that he had died, and it had been days, and he was coming toward Lazarus's home, and one of the sisters came out to meet him, and there was a lot of grief, and Jesus had great compassion for the people. Even though he knew that he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead, he still wept. He still had a great deal of empathy for their sorrow. And so Jesus has modeled this for us. And then in John 21:17, he says, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" This is when Simon had denied Christ 3 times. And so then after Jesus had risen, he's talking to Simon and he's giving him the opportunity. Basically, many people believe he's giving him the opportunity to just sort of re-embolden himself and say that he loves God 3 times. There's a greater detail to the story, but the point is that we would see this as healing, that in order for Peter to be ready to carry out the mission that God had for him, he needed to be made whole again, and he had a great deal of grief and conviction about his denying Christ. Also, the woman at the well, we know that this woman had been with multiple men. She lived with someone who was not her husband. She was very ostracized from the community. And so she was not in a place of wellness. And Jesus said, whoever drinks this water will not be thirsty again, and spoke to her and brought her healing. So this is an example of healing. I do believe that healing is something that we have room to grow, and empathy also, as I said, our response isn't always strong, and that's because oftentimes our response is more just to seek for people to just be happy and not have to really deal with a situation. But I will explain more on that when we get to the characteristic of helping others grow. I have one quote for you. Servant leaders recognize that they also have an opportunity to help make whole those with whom they come in contact. This is the idea of healing, and this is from the Spears article referenced in my final slide. So the next category I have is impact. And when I summarize this as awareness and foresight, awareness and foresight are two categories of characterizations of servant leadership that aren't very well developed. But I did find the Song article that I've already referenced is giving a decent amount of focus on those 2 points. In Isaiah 55:8, God says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord." I think this is an important scripture because as believers, we know that we are limited in this area. We're limited in our awareness and our foresight, but that's a strength for us because we know what we don't know, or at least we know that we don't know everything. And since God's ways are not our ways and his thoughts are not our thoughts, that is actually an encouragement for us, because for awareness, we want to be self-aware and notice what is around us. And then for foresight, this ties back to conceptualization and having the big vision in mind, but we need to look at how do our plans and the way that we respond to things affect those under our authority or in various areas of our organization. So foresight, according to Spears, enables the servant leader to understand the lessons from the past, the realities of the present, and the likely consequence of a decision for the future. This is an area where I feel like our school needs to grow. At my school, the leadership team makes a lot of decisions, and it is my observation that they make the decisions in a bit of a bubble. They respond to issues without considering the full impacts or ramifications. They don't think about other things that could be affected, etc. They're not practicing awareness or foresight. So I feel like this could be a good area of focus for us. Interesting quote, awareness is tricky. It seems kind of simple, or like, why did you pick this quote? But I just feel like it is important to realize Song references, he says, "We believe that we see what's around us." And this is the quote, "We do not see the world around us. We see the world we are prepared to see." All of our experiences and our life context and viewpoints affect how we see the world. And so he says we must be brave enough to open our awareness. Likewise, for foresight, another quote, it says, "If things far away don't concern you, you'll soon mourn things close at hand," meaning that those things are going to eventually be close at hand, and you're going to have to deal with the consequences of the choices that you made when you weren't thinking about the future. So that's what a reason to view foresight as a benefit and a focus to a skill to focus on. And our last section, commitments. We have growth of people and building community. I've got a few Bible scriptures here, but first I'll just clarify. We had a very strong community at our school, but this has diminished in recent years because of going online and social distancing and a significant change in staff. We lost probably half of our secondary department in the last few years. So we need to work on rebuilding the community, and we can do this through consistency, having intentional times for staff bonding, but also increased efforts, I think, during chapel and our school activities with the students and the staff. And then also, I have some verses here, Matthew 5:16, "Let your light shine before others." This is an example of Christ telling the people that as believers, we have to shine before others. We can't hide under a basket. We can't keep things to ourselves. He also talked about being salt and light. And we have to do this as a community, but also even outside of our school, because we are in a country that has a very low number of believers. And then also Matthew 22:39 says, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. This is the second commandment. And Jesus is telling the people that this comes only after loving the Lord your God. And so he's telling us already that we have to work within a community. We have to care about those around us, and that includes the growth of the people. And I really like Proverbs 27:17, although this isn't from the Gospels. It's not something that Christ said himself. It is a great proverb that kind of summarizes the idea: iron sharpens iron and one man sharpens another. We can see throughout his time with the people that Christ, he focused on the disciples. He gave parables, and he taught as a way to build up those people in his small group, but also outside in the full community, where whoever he had impact on. And so one thing that I would say, circling back to how I said we don't do a good job with empathy, I think this relates to growth of people. We do a lot of professional development, things like that, but the one area I think that we are lacking is Jesus modeled regularly correcting and rebuking. Whenever someone was maybe losing sight of the primary focus, like when Peter was telling Jesus, no, you're not going to suffer, you're not going to die, and this sort of thing, Jesus said, get thee behind me, Satan, and told him, you are focused on the things of man and not of God. When Martha was mad at her sister because she was sitting with Jesus and listening to what he was saying, and Martha was like, why don't you tell her to come and help me with serving? And Jesus said, your sister has chosen correctly. So he was correcting and rebuking to bring them back to the proper focus and the place of growth that would most benefit them. And I feel like in our community, we need to do better to rebuke and correct as needed for the sake of love and caring for the people around us. And so that's something that we can work on. And so finally, my references, I use 3 different sources to get the primary information, and this is provided here for your viewing. Thank you very much.